and we're reading my book, Thriving at Nature's Pace. A little early today because I need to get back home soon, and so Mum is still having breakfast. But that's good. She's having kiwi, which is lovely. But anyway, let me get on with it. And we are on this section about how reconciling investments, and we're talking about money and how money works. And so in this section, we're going to talk a bit about macroeconomics, which is about how the whole aggregate of money, all of it together, is controlled and what you need it. So it is necessary to get the amount of money available in the economy just right to get money to work properly. It needs to be enough for people to use, but not so much that it drives prices up. This balance is fragile. Rising prices make people poorer, people will then demand more money. When the supply of money is left in the hands of governments, the tendency is to print the more money to appease people. However, that will push prices up further. It becomes a spiral that drives inflation higher and higher. Climate change will make it more difficult to judge what is the right amount of money. The overall impact of climate change is to shrink the capacity of the economy to produce. The popular call is to call on governments to make more money available. This is generally obtained by calling on governments to subsidize adaptation or mitigation effects. However, as people receive more money, so resources will be shared according to wealth. This will cause more money to be demanded, with inflation as the inevitable result. The period starting from 2022 was a particularly powerful example of this. The inflation that followed was very much triggered by climate change disruptions. A severe drought hit China in 2022 and caused the Yangtze River to dry up. This reduced the ability to generate hydroelectric power in the southwestern regions of the country. This region is home to a large variety of factories making products for the world. These products range from basic foods and beverages to advanced electronics. The consequent scarcity and delays hurt supply chains. The changing global climate that created a rain drought in China also caused a wind drought in Europe. That summer saw an increase in European energy prices following the decline in power output as wind stalled. Coal power proved to be equally unreliable. European rivers dried up. The water level in the River Rhine were particularly low. This river is a major transport route for coal. Coal could not get to the power plants, and without sufficient coal, the power generation could not be depended on. In that same hot, dry, windless summer, even nuclear power plants had to be turned off. More than half of the nuclear power plants in France were taken offline. This was due to insufficient cooling water. Drying rivers and reservoirs affected nuclear power production because a large amount of water is needed to stop the nuclear electricity generation process from overheating. All this reduced the energy supply in Europe and drove up energy prices. In response, industries raised prices. It fed into higher costs for businesses and was passed on to the price of goods and services that people had to pay. In the US too, the Mississippi River saw water levels at extreme lows that year. Some 60% of US's grain is transported along this river. The low water level coincided with the peak of grain shipping season and forced transport prices to increase. Much of this grain is exported. The grain is used for much more than food. It's the basis of biodegradable and sustainable materials. This caused the transport price increase to feed into goods and services that people use. The spread of bird flu also started to increase around that time. It is increasingly clear that bird flu has widened its reach because of climate change. Stronger winds have carried migrating birds further, spreading the disease with them. Warmer temperatures have helped the virus to survive longer. As the virus crosses from wild birds to farm poultry, the infected poultry had to be culled. This has hurt many farming businesses and even bankrupted them. Eggs, which were once cheap and practically a staple, are no longer a guaranteed item on supermarket shelves. The virus is crossing species lines to infect cattle and humans. Cases of farm workers getting sick are still few and far between, but they're clearly increasing. All this again impacts the cost of business and trickles into the price of final goods and services people pay for. Climate change reduces the capacity of the modern economy to supply goods and services it is used to having. This creates scarcity. When money is used to try to alleviate the scarcity, it causes inflation. This is simply because money used in this way cannot create more resources. It can only distribute them according to wealth. It therefore triggers a call for more money. Unfortunately, that simply brings on higher inflation. Prices, however, ultimately increase because of psychology. To see this, imagine a person selling a house. If he had bought it for $200,000, even if he owned it for a short time, he will still very much be inclined to sell it for more. The reason for this is simply to fulfill a sense that things like houses should cost more over time. The seller benefits if the house then sells for, say, $270,000. When that happens, neighbors who are thinking of selling theirs will be encouraged. They will put their houses on the market for even more. While this is good for the seller, from a macroeconomic perspective, increasing house prices is bad news. As people have to pay more to live, wages will have to go up, businesses are forced to pay the increased wages, they end up having to raise the prices for goods and services they offer. This is an inflationary growth. No real value has been created. Everything ends up costing more. Nominally, the economy has increased even though the goods and services themselves have not changed. They now just cost more. The fallout is that businesses costs spiral out of control. This leads to economic instabilities with bankruptcies and social unrest. Following the price rises across a broad range of goods and services in the period from 2022 to 2024, social unrest broke out in many countries, affecting rich and poor alike. To keep inflation under control, the amount of money available has to be limited. This means people need an incentive to hold back from using money they have. This again is counterintuitive. The macroeconomics says money needs to be difficult to access even for people who have earned it themselves. If people have spare money, then it will create inflation. It will then end up hurting people because inflation growth is not real growth. For real growth to happen, there needs to be scarcity of money to bring out genuine needs. This triggers innovations that create new resources. Since there is a scarcity of money, the innovations themselves have to be respectful of resources. This makes it possible for real growth to benefit the environment and the planet. However, this rarely happens in the modern economy. When push comes to shove, governments prefer an easier to achieve nominal growth than allow the pain of scarcity to work through to bring about real growth. That is why Nobel Prize winning economist Milton Friedman advocated putting the control of money into the hands of independent central banks. So we pause here. We'll go on next time about Milton's idea of independent central banks. So there you go. What do you think, Mom?
咁有個 central bank 嘅，咁就可以搞掂。
有個 central bank 就可以搞掂。My mom is saying, would it be fixed if there was central bank? Well, this is an experiment. We have had independent central banks for about maybe 20 years. And for a while, things were easy. The world was going well, and so there was no other pressure on the central banks. But when things get difficult, then central banks have to answer to politicians. So in the end, they can't really do what they need to do. Because at the end of the day, it's all about people and their psychology. And no matter what happens when they think this is the right thing, when the bulk of people are saying they actually prefer things to be easier, then politicians and central bankers tend to go that way. It's very hard for them to actually stop and do the hard thing. Very often, they are not able to stay in office for long enough. And so that becomes a difficulty. But one central bank who did make the difference was Volcker in 1970s. And he was in the United States, and there was the oil crisis, the first oil crisis in 1970s, when OPEC, the Middle Eastern group of oil producers, decided to withhold, as a result of war with Israel, the same thing as now, production of oil and sale of oil. And that caused prices to rise massively. And the central banker in the United States for a long time then took interest rates up very high, so that it became very expensive to use money. And that eventually calmed it. But along the way, he was not liked. Many people did not like him at all. So it takes real kind of courage, in a sense, for the central bankers to do the right thing. So there you go. Okay, I'm Dr. David Coe. I'm with my mum, Eleanor.
Yeah. Bye.
We're reading my book, Thriving at Nature's Pace. It's about a new approach to climate change. Please recommend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well,
So,
don't